Hey everybody, KC here. So I am in San Francisco. I'm back in Northern California. I was just here a few weeks ago, and I did a video in which I was in a neighborhood not far from downtown, and I was in some ways amazed by how normal everything seemed to be. Right, despite everything we read about San Francisco being a dystopian hellscape. So this trip, what I decided to do is I decided I wanted to stop and go to the central part of the city, the part where tourists go, the part where the business district is, because I wanted to see how it has changed over the years. And, the first time I came to San Francisco was the summer of 1973, and I've been back dozens of times since. I've always thought it was a terrific city, always one of my favorite places, and I was curious what I would find coming back, considering all the trials and tribulations that San Francisco has been through. I'm wondering how much of it is bad publicity and how much of it is real. So I'm going to walk around a little bit and see what things are like. One thing I can tell you, there are hundreds of people lined up to take a cable car ride. So that's got to be a good sign. On the other hand, I'm seeing a lot of boarded up retail. Anyway, I'm going to keep walking. So behind me is the big, beautiful Apple store that Apple opened just a few years ago, right across the street from Union Square. And the thing is, I can remember when I used to come to this Apple store from time to time, it would always be packed. I mean, it was a show place. They were doing a lot of business, but it was just always mobbed because people wanted to see it. It's just architecturally really interesting. It's not mobbed today. It's still a show place, but there's just not as many people in there as you would expect that there would be. Again, specifically at a time of year when you figure there'll be a lot of tourists around, in addition to the people who live and work here. It is a show place, but maybe more in the way of a museum as opposed to it being a functioning and really busy store. Well, I have to admit, I'm relieved by this. So when I was young, and I would come to San Francisco, sometimes I would see my Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Tom, who lived out in Livermore, but they would come into the city and they'd meet me, and one of their favorite things to do was to take me to Sears Fine Foods for French toast made from sourdough bread, which in my opinion is still like the best French toast I've ever had. I am relieved to find out that Sears Fine Food is still open. That's a really good thing. Although I have to tell you, walking around the city, it sort of feels a little bit like the Donald Sutherland version of the Asian Body Snatchers. Right? It's just not that busy. Not nearly as busy as you expect it to be during the summer. I have to say though that I'm sad that not all of my, touchstone restaurants have survived. So behind me is a restaurant called Hunan Home in Chinatown. And I have a sort of a sentimental connection to this place, for no other reason than it's got to be 35 years ago. I was in San Francisco on a speaking engagement, and Murray Rayful was also speaking at the same event. And afterwards, he said to me, and I started to call some other people, he goes, okay, we're all going to the best Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. I was pretty young, I had no reason to doubt him. He said, we're going to Hunan Home because they have the most fantastic coconut shrimp that you've ever had in your life. Well, you know something? He was absolutely right. It was amazing. And over the years, when I've come back to San Francisco and I've had the time, I've always come to Hunan Home for the coconut shrimp. And I brought my daughter here. I brought my wife here. I think I brought the whole family. We were on vacation here once a long time ago. Love it. Well, Hunan Home did not survive. I don't know if it was just time. I don't know if it was money. I don't know if it was COVID. I suspect it was maybe it was some combination of all three, but it's gone. And that makes me a little sad. No more coconut shrimp. So that restaurant behind me there is Cafe Zoetrope, which is Francis Ford Coppola's restaurant here in San Francisco. And again, one of the places I like to come, mostly because they made the most amazing chilaquiles. And I would love to come here after a long day, have some wine, some chilaquiles. It was one of the best things. I remember once actually sitting at the bar and Francis Ford Coppola came in and took a bottle of wine from the bar and went upstairs, because upstairs is where they have a lot of editing suites where they've edited films like The Godfather, Godfather 2, The Conversation. So they're still open. They've survived COVID. On the other hand, they've also taken chilaquiles off the menu, which I don't understand. I don't think that's a COVID thing, but I have to tell you, it left me a little brokenhearted. So I didn't have a ton of time. So for my last stop, I decided to come down to the Ferry Building, which is always a good place in terms of restaurants. There's usually a lot of activity, some combination of both tourists and locals, and lots of really interesting kind of food kiosks. When I first got here, it seemed kind of quiet, right? It seemed kind of quiet. I thought, oh man, the Ferry Building is going to, they've taken it on the chin too. And to be honest, there were a bunch of places that were closed. But one of the interesting things was there were a number of places that clearly had been identified as having really, really good food. And there were lines. There was the Hog Island Oyster Company. There was an Asian place. There was a taco place. There was an empanadas place that had the longest line that I could see. So I decided to get empanadas because nothing sells me on a place like a long line. And I have to say the empanadas were great. Tells us a lot about how food, even when times are tough and cities and businesses have been thrown off their stride, the degree to which food can bring people together. Listen, what I've shown you today is just, a very, very small and highly selective snapshot of what I've seen in San Francisco. If I had a little bit more time, I could see a lot of other things. If I had a local guiding me around, I might see other things as well. But one thing that does occur to me that it's a business lesson here is, listen, California is a state that it's got its issues, and certainly San Francisco has its issues. And listen, before the pandemic, the two biggest problems that San Francisco was dealing with was A, housing was too expensive, and B, homeless. Poor people living on the streets, while rich people were driving up the cost of real estate. I don't know how long it's going to take for San Francisco to come back. I don't know how long it's going to take for California to kind of regain the mojo that it had, although I'm pretty confident that it will. But I do think there's a business lesson here, which is you always have to pay attention to your value proposition. You always have to pay attention to your brand equity. Cities, like businesses, got stress tested during the pandemic, and some of them failed, some of them succeeded, and a lot of them got mixed grades. It's really important going forward that businesses, as well as communities, prepare for the next pandemic. I don't know whether it's going to be a pandemic or something else, but you always have to prepare for the possibility that new stresses are going to hit your business, hit your community, and you're going to have to deal with them. That should be the one thing we've learned from the pandemic. I'm not entirely confident that businesses and communities have learned that lesson, but I think it's something we have to think about. The stress tests of yesterday, they mean maybe nothing compared to the stress tests of tomorrow, and we have to pay attention. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my little sojourn around San Francisco. That's what's on my mind this morning, and as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.